This is The Cannamom Show, a podcast chronicling the inspiring stories of real women in the emerging cannabis industry. Your host, Joyce Gerber, mom, lawyer, political activist, has been speaking with women from coast to coast and around the world who are leaders in the revolution of cannabis and caregiving, continuing on her mission to lift up the stories of the women creating the cannabis industry by sharing their canna stories with you. So go make yourself a cup of tea or roll yourself a joint, sit back, and learn something new about this magical plant on The Cannamom Show with Joyce Gerber.
From the Tip O'Neill Studios in North Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's The Cannamom Show. Now here's your host, Joyce Gerber.
Welcome back to The Cannamom Show, where we continue on our mission of crushing cannabis stigma. All right, Dave, there's been a lot of canna drama in Massachusetts. Have you been following this?
No, do tell.
Oh, there's going to be a shortage of cannabis on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket this summer because the growers shutting down and you can't do transport on federal waters because it's illegal, because it's still a controlled substance.
God, cannabis shortage.
All right, I got the globe. So yeah, can you see anyone on YouTube?
Is that yes? Joyce is holding a hard copy of the Boston Globe. Is it
you know
the
it
lead
still
story?
existed?
I get it every once in a while on a Sunday. I have to drive around to like 3 different supermarkets to find the stupid newspaper.
All right, stop by my house. It's there. All right, so it's the top of the fold.
Yep. Above
And
the fold is. Yep.
an editorial. It's in the back. Anyways, it was a lot of canna drama in Massachusetts. So.
So what is there? Is it disturbing, or is there hope, or what do we expect?
It's actually connected to the Cannamom Show because we're everywhere. So do you remember the Green Lady Dispensary, the mom and daughter team, Nicole and Clea? Yeah. Okay. So they were actually our guests in March, and they have a lovely dispensary in Newton, which I've been to. I talk about, but they're also on the vineyard, and this is connected to them because, again, and we have a lawyer coming on who can talk more about it. But Massachusetts does include Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, but it's across water, open water.
Right. Dukes County.
So issues. So, it's always connected to the Cannamom Show and Martha's Vineyard, but I don't know what's going to happen because if they can't grow it out there and they can't transport it, there's a lawsuit going on. I don't know all the details, but, cannabis, very, very timely.
What's Bill Clinton going to do if he doesn't get his joints?
Exactly.
Come on.
All those people on the vineyard. Don't you feel bad for them?
Bubba's got to have his cannabis, yeah.
And in Chappie, all the people in Chappie.
Yeah. The Chappie's not happy at this news, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I played tennis yesterday, my little tennis world, with someone who has a house on Chappie. We were discussing this. She wasn't really upset, but
But I'm sure there are some. Yeah.
It was a small sample. All right. What else? Seniors. Seniors in cannabis are getting in trouble today. We always worry about protecting the children, keep your stuff locked up, to make sure they know what it is. But seniors are getting into gummies and candies.
Wow. Just because you're older doesn't mean you can't be a stoner. That almost rhymes.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm rhyming everything today.
Keep your stuff locked up, people, your kids and your grandparents. They're all going after it. Yeah. And, if I don't know.
You can't spell cannabis without Nana, right?
Oh, Lordy Lord. All right. I was actually upset because the way they portrayed it is we were poisoning people. And I do not like that word poisoning. People are having effects from these cannabis products. I will give you that. And if you're a senior or anyone taking other medications, one of the issues with cannabis, it can help you take less of your medication. So it may be the actual medication that you're taking that is being enhanced in combination with the cannabis. So there's a lot of reasons this is happening. Stop blaming the plant.
Yeah, if you're going to call it a poison, it's just like the word drug, really. You can apply it to coffee also, anything that sort of changes something in your body, I suppose you could say is a form of poison, but cannabis does just as much good as it does anything bad. So
look, we've evangelized you. Yeah. And alcohol is literally a poison. Literally. Right. Not even okay. All right. So seniors, be careful. It's, when you're taking your grandkids' cannabis, ask them what's in it.
take your gummies and put one in those little pill holders that you have for the days of the week.
Oh yeah.
But don't, just go by Monday to, don't take Friday's gummy on Thursday,
Yeah.
I mean,
Low and
that's
slow.
all you got.
Low and slow.
Yeah.
All right. We need to go into seniors. I don't know if people are going to be using this medicine. Need more education. So people should be going in really educating people, because this isn't, whatever. It's not really a joke. And cannabis is part of like a senior set now. So they should be taught, what it is, and help them figure out, just like we would teach anyone else, and help them, because their doctors aren't helping them.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's no reason why seniors can't make use of cannabis for all the reasons that non-seniors do, right? Seniors get depressed too. Seniors have pain. Seniors have anxiety. So
yeah, so,
have at it.
There we go. Seniors and the kids. All right. So we do have a big show today. In addition to our guest, who I will be introducing in a minute, we'll be speaking with Cassie Lemon, founder of Let's Jam, a Canna Jam company that spreads a little love and comfort in every jar. So let's see. I have 2 culture corners. Let's do the culture corner music, and then we'll move on to today's guest.
The Culture Corner.
I don't know. I find that funny. Okay.
I have my
Tea.
cup of tea here ready for Culture Corner.
Cup of tea. All right. I have 2. The first one is a movie I rented called One Life. It is starring Anthony Hopkins. It is based on a true story of a British man who helped save over 600 children, mostly Jewish, escape Prague right before the Nazi invasion in 1939. It's really it's a moving story, and I think it's timely given all the rise in hate around the world. I talk about this a lot. It's a story about why each one of us has the power to help others, and that we may never actually understand the impact we have in this world with with acts of kindness. So the One Life, it's about an ordinary man who found out over 40 years after he did this mitzvah, how impactful his actions were on saving those children.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like kind of a different spin on the Oscar Schindler story. Obviously, a different guy.
Yeah,
Right.
but again, it was children. He saw something. He said he could do something. He did have some Jewish roots connections. He was a person who, again, the Jewish history. People often came over and converted because of what other issues they were having. They may not. The next generation didn't even know they had Jewish roots, and whatever was sprung in him at that time, he went over there and he took action, and he did something because he said he could.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Where did you see the movie, at home or in the theater?
At home, and I actually don't remember who produced it. I was just looking up good movies, and it just came out, and Anthony Hopkins. It was such a subtle performance of this man, very humble man, and he almost reminded me like of my dad. Like he was just like a dude who did well for his family, but he did this one thing in the 40s, and then he found out later in life that all these children lived, and they said he lived to be 106, and all these children they connected with him at the end. Just to see your impact on the world in that very tangible way, when you feel like maybe you did nothing, or he felt like he hadn't done enough. I think that was sort of the whole, that he only got 600 out. That's what he kept saying, and he knew that there were thousands.
But for our listeners, did you rent it from home?
I did. Yeah, I looked up good movies, and it came up.
No, I'm just saying it doesn't appear to be streaming anywhere for free, but you can
No, it's like $5.99. It wasn't even an expensive one.
buy it for $5.99 on
It was a cheap rental.
Apple.
I was going to rent something that was $20, and that seemed like a bargain, and I think I enjoyed it more. Okay.
Also stars the great Helena Bonham Carter.
Oh,
she's a
she's
favorite
so
of mine.
good. Yeah,
She's great.
she's like almost like a Jewish mother figure in there. All right. And the second recommendations is totally different. It's a series on Apple TV, Palm Royale. Have you seen this? It's starring Kristen Wiig, Laura Dern, Allison Janney, Ricky Martin, Carol Burnett. Oh my God, everybody. It's kind of a campy story of Palm Beach in the 60s, and it's a little cringy, I gotta say, at some points, but it's serious in some points, and the clothes are fantastic.
Yeah, the best thing about the show, and this is gonna be damning by faint praise, I'm afraid, but is how it looks. It looks amazing, and Kristen Wiig looks just the perfect role as the wannabe West Palm Beach socialite, right? Who is in the beginning of the tale, she's kind of, forcing her way into these social circles and kind of scamming people. And then the story kind of changes. It gets weird, but overall, I enjoyed it. So
Yeah.
it's light fare, you might say. It's not heavy, right?
It's not what I said. Yeah, exactly. And I gotta say, Ricky Martin,
Not
he's
bad.
still so cute. How could he still
Oh
be
yeah,
so cute forever?
yeah. He does look like he hasn't aged, and he's not a bad actor. He's yeah. He's 52. He's
Wow.
3 years younger than me. That bastard.
And he can really act. So I'm a View. I watch The View every week, every day. I mean, so I'm a weird
Mhm.
View fanatic. And he was on there, and that's what inspired me to actually watch this, because I had started watching it and I got cringed out by it a little bit. I didn't think it was that good, but then I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, he's in it, and I watched the whole thing, and it was just very nice and entertaining, and the acting was an era that I kind of remember because I was born in '65. So yeah,
Carol Burnett is also fantastic, and it's just stunning to me that she's 91, and she apparently hasn't lost a beat. She's still got the comic timing. She looks
and
good, right?
yeah, and half the time
91.
she's in a coma and she's still really funny. I don't know how you
Yeah,
do
I
that.
know. I know. Yeah.
All right. So those are my culture corners today. I haven't
Very
done it
good.
in a while, so I figured two would be good. All right. Thanks, Dave. We're going to get on to today's guest. Okay. To today's guest. Today's guest is a nonprofit tax attorney focused on the emerging cannabis and psychedelic tax exempt sectors. She's also an adjunct law professor. She is, as I say about many of my guests, wicked smart. In addition to her legal credentials, she also holds degrees in religion from the University of Southern California and a Master's of Divinity from the Union Theological Seminary, where her concentration was religion and law. She received her JD from New York Law School, cum laude, and her LL.M. in taxation from Georgetown University Law Center with distinction. And as a graduate tax scholar at Georgetown, today's guest received a research fellowship to study the tax approaches taken by religious communities that utilize psychedelics. Today's guest teaches cannabis law at Roger Williams University School of Law and tax practice and procedures at her Suffolk Law School. Her legal scholarship focuses on the intersection of constitutional law, tax law, and drug law, with a focus on issues of religious freedom. Please welcome to the Cannabis Show, Victoria Litman. Welcome, Victoria.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Joyce.
Hi. So we haven't seen each other in person in a bit, but we have a lot in common, and I just love the topics you work on. So, and I've been seeing you on a couple of webinars lately. So, like we say here in Boston, you're wicked smart. You are in Rhode Island, right?
I am.
Okay. So what does on your unusual combination, what inspired your academic studies in religion and law, and how did that lead to psychedelics and cannabis?
Super big
All right,
question.
let's just start your beginning. Like you went into religion, and I am a Jew. I talk about being Jewish in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
industry, and I do have a undergraduate degree in religion as well. So that's a kind of a interesting undergraduate degree. But you combine it with law, and now you're actually using it in a specific way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, like we're all evolving people all the time. And
Mhm.
I am all the things that you mentioned, and also am still like evolving and maybe trying to be less a lawyer and more an academic for reasons we could talk about. But yeah, I similarly grew up Jewish. We've definitely talked about that. And now am actually married to a rabbi, so very involved in Jewish life.
Mhm.
And yeah, was drawn to study religion. I went to undergrad in LA, so there was a lot of religious diversity, and I found that was a really compelling classroom environment where you could learn from a lot of different perspectives. Yeah, and then also realized at some point during my undergrad career that there was some interesting legal history related to the religious use of psychedelics. One of the biggest cases at the Supreme Court in the First Amendment religious freedom context deals with the religious use of peyote. So it's a classic case you study in a religion and law class in law school that also, overlaps with my passion for psychedelics. And so I kind of saw that there's this opportunity to, bring knowledge about religion and psychedelics into the legal realm, and that motivated that trajectory.
I love it because often people think, again, I say I'm a former lawyer, but I play tennis, I wear pearls, and this idea of being sort of steadfast and upright, and I don't know, and psychedelics is the opposite narrative. So to bring them together, I think is really it opens people's eyes and they hear it in a different way. So yeah. All right, so there you are. You just I guess maybe explain what you're doing a little bit now. So you are teaching, you're doing just sort of what the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I wear multiple hats. I would say in this, I mean, they're all equally. I have been working with clients the last few years in a solo practice. As you mentioned, tax exempt organizations involved in cannabis and psychedelics. So some of that are organizations doing advocacy, think tanks, 501c3 or C4 organizations, and then a sort of subspecialty within that are religious organizations utilizing psychedelics. So I've written a bunch on the topic. If you're interested in like the full version and you're listening to this, you can find that link to my LinkedIn page or SSRN, which is where legal scholarship gets published. But I have been helping churches with federal tax compliance, knowing that there's a lot of asterisks there around, the legal pathways for these churches generally. I really focus on helping them understand and navigate tax laws that are special to religious communities, with the idea that even if there aren't other clear legal pathways for psychedelic churches, tax compliance still matters because in very short, you can be legally defensible as a church. You can organize yourself as a church, and that can help protect your activities. And so tax compliance is a part of that.
Well, that's interesting. Right. All right. So
that's one hat. That's one hat.
Yeah,
the other
yeah,
hat
yeah.
is teaching and research. Teaching and research.
So when it's like two different. All right. So that's what you're doing. I know it's kind of like to start at the beginning. So before you even got into this kind of religious work or working with the taxation, tax code, again, it seems like things that shouldn't really work together, but you explain them in the way that a lawyer would, that you're protecting yourself, and if you're going to be a religious institution who is protected by this precedent, which exists now, we'll see what happens, but the law, you need to sort of comply by the law, so it's defensible. So that's interesting. So what was your relationship with cannabis and psychedelics before you actually got into this work?
Just one more point on the taxing is the tax law also defines what a church is in the law. So that's part of what makes it interesting.
Okay.
Oh yeah. No, there's just so much. I think it's interesting because I've spent
I
want to
go. Actually, I want to have a whole conversation about psychedelics. I want to talk about that more in depth, but let's just talk about
okay,
sort
cool.
of like
so
personal. Yeah.
My history. I grew up in Northern Virginia and then went to college in LA, and really benefited from medical marijuana like during college, and really got exposed to the possibilities of medical marijuana, right? Because I sometimes say, I could legally buy gray legally, I mean legally under state medical marijuana laws in California as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, buy medical cannabis, but I couldn't legally buy alcohol. But I found so much benefit in cannabis, and that really opened my eyes up to just what I would have considered and still consider lies that I'd been told about drug law, and about the purposes of drug law and about criminalization. And then, being in Southern California, the psychedelics are in the culture. Yeah, those substances were also, finding me during college, and exposing me, to new ways of experiencing things, and also ways that were similar to me as someone who had experienced religion. And I think really helped me in my own personal healing journey, and also journey of personal reflection and meaning making, and which I think is so cool that I had that during college, which is a time when you're already in that space of self-discovery, like integrating these experiences as I'm deciding how I want to shape my career. So definitely rooted in a lot of personal and meaningful experience.
And again, kind of coming back and decide like what does a high achiever look like, or what does a high achiever do, or how does this work in our society? Over and over again, the women who are using cannabis are breaking that mold. It does not make you lazy. It does not make you stupid. It calms you down in a way. What did you think of cannabis before you started using it? Because I always talk about how I believed it, like, it killed brain cells and was so dangerous. I really did believe all that. So did you think it was really that bad? And were you nervous to try it? Or like, what did your family, was it like a stigma? I don't know. How did that work for you? Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely stigma. I definitely growing up in Virginia thought that it was bad. I mean, I definitely was exposed to it during high school, but still thought it was bad. And it took me a few years of using it and finding benefit from it. And then I even during college was like, well, let me take a break, because what if this is harming me? And then I found that it was, I wasn't better off taking a break from it. I actually was worse off. So I think I experienced, I learned the term cognitive dissonance, where you're like, well, if this is helping me, how can it be bad? And it really, I had to do my own personal overcoming of my own stigma against it. And I mean, it definitely took my family a long time to because I was very open. I'm interested in cannabis. I'm interested in psychedelics. There are psychedelic research happening. I was volunteering for MAPS, like in college. Like this was, still phase two, I think. I mean, early 20 teens. And my family, my grandma or whoever is like, well, I hope that you grow out of this. And then now I get a call from my grandma. Oh, my arthritis doctor is recommending that I check it out. I'm like, okay, like I don't want to be like, I told you so. I just want you to feel better. And so if this will help you, like that would be great. So definitely had to overcome.
No judgment, people. No judgment. We just want to help. That's really funny. But that is the truth of it. Like, so again, I know Rick Doblin from MAPS. I tell the story before. So my cousin is married to his sister. So back in the day, before Rick Doblin was Rick Doblin from MAPS, he was at our house for like a Passover Seder, talking to my dad about, I think, marijuana. I can't really remember, but I remember being a teenager being, who is this guy? Why are they letting him in our house?
Yeah.
And now look at him. He's changed the face of psychedelics. So
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, I remember for me, it was even now, but at the moment when you first have those experiences where you're like, wow, this helps me. And I wasn't suffering from extreme PTSD. I had trauma, but, when you have that experience and then people in your life that are suffering and you're like, why won't you listen to me? Like it felt so serious. And I have memories like of college graduation, just being really frustrated that like this could help you all and you're not listening to me. And then the New York Times writes about it, then the FDA, and it's like, but it's not about being right, just to your point. It's just like I wish that people would listen. And but I do think like getting my LL.M in tax from Georgetown, like even among lawyers, tax is a very like, oh,
serious.
it's scary.
Absolutely.
It's hard. And Georgetown is a top program, or, I'm licensed in multiple states, including California, which people say, oh, California is so hard. And it's almost like I want to try and do really hard things to even prove even more that, pot doesn't make you stupid. Pot doesn't make you lazy. Like that it's allowed me to do those really hard things. And hopefully that can kind of help the cause.
I mean, again, she's one of the women I talk about all the time, just, breaking these ideas of what this is, because they're achieving. They're not just functioning. They're achieving things that people say they shouldn't really even be achieving. So how we work with our body, again, coming back to that idea that people call it a poison or it's poisoning, what we think of this plant and how it works with our body is really important. And one of the issues is, I mean, it's a body, mind, spirit thing also. So let's go to psychedelics in churches. And I still talk about psychedelics like a scared old woman, but I am getting closer. My daughter said the other day, maybe we should do one. I don't know. I am a person of faith. I go to, I'm very involved with my own community of faith. And I do think it helps sometimes just to be a little bit more relaxed. And I get the spiritual part. So let's talk about kind of what the work you're doing, taxation, I guess, with psychedelics in churches. And then maybe some research or talking about why psychedelics should be legal in the first place. Maybe that's what we talk about a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about like my lawyer hat where I'm doing, tax, really limiting my scope because, newsflash, like psychedelics are illegal in like almost every context. So I really limit my scope of legal practice to tax advice for churches that are legally defensible or other organizations that are not actually touching the substance, whether that's cannabis or psychedelics. And that's sort of protecting myself, but also giving me freedom to be public and write and think about these topics. So yeah, the other hats I'm wearing are professor and researcher. So I've taught cannabis law multiple times. Next year I'll be teaching cannabis and psychedelic law and a torts, which is a big first year course. So trying to really get into the academic world. And yeah, so I'm a researcher affiliated with the Project on Psychedelic Law and Regulation, which is a project at the Petrie-Flom Health Law Center at Harvard Law School. So it's the first law school project on psychedelic law. And so as part of my work there, I've been digging into research, which I would talk about as the spiritual elements of psychedelic medicine. So what I do in legal practice and what I've also written on, which again, you could find online by looking up like psychedelic churches and my name, are the psychedelic churches, which is this growing movement of people forming communities under legal precedent that could allow for the religious use of psychedelics. Now, on the other side, and I won't take this for granted, right? There are 2 states that have passed state laws that make legal psychedelics in regulated frameworks. In Colorado, there also is a self-regulating decriminalization aspect. But in Oregon and eventually in Colorado, there will be centers where people can go legally buy psychedelics to use on site. So it's they're facilitated. It's not a dispensary model. I've written something else recently about why I think we should talk about dispensaries, but for now the laws aren't the take-home model. And the same thing through the FDA. So the FDA, there are multiple what they're called psychedelic assisted psychotherapies that are going through FDA trials that could be approved in the next few years, including from MAPS's subsidiary now called Lykos for MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And in the same thing, in those frameworks, you're not taking a drug by yourself or in nature with your friends. You're doing it in a clinical setting with a provider. So some of the research I've been working on publishing in book chapters through conferences at Harvard, and I'll be presenting in Amsterdam in a few weeks at an international psychedelic research conference, is thinking about what is the spiritual element of those facilitated psychedelic experiences. And some of it are, there's ethical concerns because people are highly suggestible when they're under psychedelics, meaning like you could be very much influenced by your set and setting, which is maybe a psychedelic psychonaut understanding. But and so your therapist could decide that they want to put a Buddha in the room, or they want to help you validate that what you're having is some religious or spiritual experience. And while that might be great, if you consent to it, I think that should be part of the consent process, right? And chaplains as spiritual care providers should be part of that process. So that's very short, I guess, summary of some of the research I'm working on now, just about like the ethics of spiritual care.
I mean, that is, to me, it's fascinating in a way that, I mean, there's a whole level of like what we're doing we talk specifically about veterans, how we're caring for our veterans, the kind of pharmaceuticals we're giving them, but this could be accessed by them, but it has to be very carefully. It's not just a pill that you give them. It's a whole experience with another human being, and there has to be a lot of considerations about how those interactions, that relationship works. That's a whole nother level. That, again, cannabis just came in as a marketplace, so we're not really doing that with cannabis. But here we're really talking about how to make it medically efficacious, I guess, and like yeah, and actually, but understanding that there's a spiritual side to it too. It's not just a pill that you take. That's a little bit more complicated than we think about as pharmaceuticals and treatments, right?
Right. I mean, it's interesting too because the FDA doesn't usually regulate therapy, so it's a whole. There's a lot being written and research. I would say there's even more funding and research and writing about psychedelics than cannabis.
Oh yeah.
Maybe for reasons around challenges in research, maybe because of these unique features, maybe because people see it as more potentially profitable. But it's also, we've actually seen the opposite, right? In most states, you can't do on-site consumption for cannabis.
Right.
But the on-site consumption piece of psychedelics also makes it extremely expensive because you have to pay a facilitator, usually a medical professional, which is so one of the arguments in favor of using spiritual care providers because they could be more affordable than healthcare providers. But just to your question before around like, well, why should they be legalized in the first place? And I just want to touch on this. And I do touch on some of my writing. I think that the strongest argument is because people are already doing it en masse, right? And we can make it safer. Not to say that, the mushrooms that you're going to get on the street are like not mushrooms, but just that I think that there should be some amount of oversight and some amount of safe supply. Particularly when you're talking about synthetic psychedelics, so like your MDMA or LSD, being able to know how much you're taking and what you're taking, and not having that fear around criminalization. I think like those are really strong arguments in favor of legalization. But as the lawyer, it's like legalization or not legalization or criminalization. There's so many details that really matter, and that make being involved in this in sort of like an academic scholar realm really fun because when you're in the industry side, you might have different interests, financial interests, other interests, but as someone who is just looking at the whole picture and wants people to have access and wants it to be safe, I get to make arguments related to that as opposed to maybe just the profit side.
And you get to see all the different perspectives and get it out there so everyone can hear the different things that are going on. Because it is again, if anyone tells you they're an expert, they're lying. This cannabis specifically, and psychedelics is just sort of evolving really quickly in a very different path than cannabis is. And if the policies and laws around it have to make sense so that we can actually treat people, because that's the whole point of it, if it's going to be medicine. So we need people to understand all the different angles of it so that, a lot. That's amazing. What time is it? All right, let's just talk a little quickly about, we're going back to cannabis schedule. rescheduling. It's going to happen. It's going to become 3. It's not going to be 1. I don't think it's that great, but it's not that terrible. How do you feel about it? And yeah.
Yes, I was literally today working on finalizing a piece I was writing. It was so funny. I got asked to write a piece for this Harvard Law online journal like 3 weeks ago when the news first came out that like officially DEA is going to follow the Schedule 3 recommendation. And then while I was writing it, we get the notice for proposed rulemaking. Then yesterday, this rule was published. Just so everyone listening maybe knows, this rule was published yesterday. Federal register, and now there's a 60-ish 62 days, not sure why 62 days, comment period. People can submit comments. You can go online, you can see what the comments are around Schedule 3. What I write in this piece and what I think and which I've written in the past is like it's not really actually going to change a lot necessarily for state legal businesses. There could be tax relief. I also think maybe the tax relief might get limited by what are called interpretive rules, where they could say like you don't benefit or you're like I don't know. There's a lot that could happen in details, and it's a lot of money that the government would be leaving on the table if they actually give this tax relief. And technically, under Schedule 3, all these state businesses, all these state legal marijuana products are not legal. They're not FDA approved drugs. They're not in compliance with the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. They're not being prescribed by a doctor and sold at a pharmacy. So they're still illegal drugs. And the purpose of 280E, even though it, became before the state legal cannabis, is to disincentivize selling illegal drugs. So I feel like if the government could find a way to still have that punitive tax on non-compliant state legal operators. That said, what I say is,
And
Congress
I gotta say,
still.
so if you don't follow her, so I've seen you have this argument with people on LinkedIn,
Thank you.
and they won't. No one's listening to what you're saying. Everybody who's got a business believes what I just said, that the 280 is going to relieve that, so it's fine. I really do follow the Parabola Center with, Shailene and Lori and Lucy and Chanel, and I believe what they say, that it's not really that great. It doesn't help with the getting people out of prison. It doesn't help with the, it's still a criminal activity. It's not necessarily helping businesses. It may become worse because it means if it's a medicine, then you have to go through all those agencies that you just sort of rambled off. So it does make me a little nervous, but I do a podcast in my daughter's bedroom, but you really seem to think you're worried too. So I don't know. I hear your voice. I've seen you out there. I see people keep pushing back, but again, it's always the minutia. It's the details, right? The policy.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize, like, so people kept saying, oh, well, the rules decided and regulations are different. There's going to be regulations, and not all of them are going to have to go through this formal rulemaking process. Agencies have a lot of discretion. But the law, what I wrote an article in like the fall around federal cannabis policy, and my opinion is still the same, that Congress needs to pass legislation to make clear that the FDA's jurisdiction is limited, because federal agencies, the like 3-letter things I rattled off, which like I take a lot for granted, and I appreciate that you clarifying, just because there's a lot happening. That they take their direction from Congress, and if they have jurisdiction, they're going to release statements that say we have jurisdiction, even if they don't have the funding to enforce that. And so I think Congress could do a lot of good, whether they will or not, who knows, saying, actually, FDA, you don't have that much jurisdiction. And there has been federal legislation introduced that would make all of the state legal products in compliance with the federal laws, the FDA laws and the DEA laws. But this rescheduling is not it. It wouldn't do it.
No. So, and I did talk about going down for the Last Prisoners Project about 3 weeks ago now, and talking to different representatives and Congress people, and just this idea that we can't forget the story, the narrative, and what happened to the people who are harmed by this story, and that has to be brought up along with the businesses that we're creating, and again, the medical part, which may not get lost at some point, but we'll come back to that. All right, so we got to take a quick break. Oh, we'll come back with Victoria on the other side. So we'll be back on the other side with Victoria after we speak a little bit with Cassie Lemon, founder of Let's Jam. Welcome, Cassie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. All right, so let's just start with the obvious. Why infuse jam, Cassie?
Absolutely. Well, I thought it was so perfect when you talked about seniors leading off with the podcast, because when I started this idea, my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so I, had been using cannabis with my own body, working in education and managing stress and anxiety. And I, again, watched her watched her with this disease and just started doing immense amount of research on the plant, what exists out there, right?
Mhm.
And I knew if I could get my mother to try it in a jam form, something that she was very familiar with, and the fact that she takes an immense amount of pharmaceuticals every morning, and the idea of taking something else to bring regulation or relief in the body is a very daunting experience.
Mhm.
So again, being her able to smear it on her toast in the morning, which she eats because she has to eat with all the medicine.
Mhm.
It was a way just to help her get that relief and take away one, destigmatizing it,
Mhm.
and also making it just feel daunting of having to put something else to try to bring that balance and relief in the body.
Oh,
So
that's interesting. So,
how
okay,
it
so
started.
I think it's such a great way. Can you just explain, maybe for people who don't understand, like when your mom would take this, what kind of, what was she experiencing and what did it help with? Like exactly what did she find the relief from? And actually, did it help with any of the other medications, which I've heard that it actually helps people titrate down off of other things? Yeah.
When she first started using cannabis at the beginning, I know they had to adjust her blood pressure medicine. And I'm also
Oh.
like, well, you potentially reduce your stress and anxiety in your body, So there was some fluctuations that happened kind of in the beginning as she started introducing it. A lot of it is from pain management and movement support.
Mm.
Um, Especially again with the not production of the dopamine in the body, she feels every bit of pain.
Mm. Okay.
And when that's off, and it's never really right. There's always a sense of chronic pain in my mom's body at some point in time.
Mhm.
But cannabis has just helped support and relieving that discomfort that comes from that to help her stay movement and in action. And I think one of the most exciting things, and again, you can't draw it directly back to cannabis because we don't have the infrastructure right in the
Right.
framework like what's being discussed here. But recently, my mom now has had it for 8 years, and doctors recently have been like, you have quite a bit of mobility for somebody that has had this disease for 8 years. And I'm like, well, you've been medicating for a while.
That's it. So do
Supplementing.
you think it's helping with what I hear all the time is it's the issue of a lot of it is inflammation.
Yeah.
It's part, once the inflammation,
Yes.
your mobility sex. So you think it's actually helping with her inflammation through through eating it? Does she use it as other products too?
She only eats it though. So she'll have gummies, she'll have chocolate, she has jam, she has a plethora of things that she can choose from.
Okay.
And I think that's been one of the most like powerful things too to see is again something that is so regiment, right? And that she has to take every 4 hours in regards to her pharmaceutical medicine to actually have this to supplement when she wants to, how she wants to, what she's feeling. It's just given her a sense of like power back
Okay.
and control back over how to support her body.
Like a little bit of agency. All right, let's just actually,
Yeah.
I like that idea. Again, we're talking about the seniors. This should be part of a regular, it shouldn't be something that comes to people as a last resort, which is often the stories I share on this podcast about people literally are desperate. They're desperate. They're at their end of their ropes. Somehow they find cannabis. And even though it doesn't fix everything, it, like what your mother's experiencing, it gives them enough relief to
Yeah.
be like, wow, I don't have to feel shitty all the time. And then
Right.
just, you know, but it does go against the shame because people don't
Yeah.
even understand where the shame is. And uh, if you're not telling your doctors you're using it, there's a whole nother cycle of this, but trying to be proud, not like proud, you're not proud to take medication, but just that you take, it's normalized in a way that it's just, I take my Advil, I take this and I have a piece of toast and I feel better and it's fine. It's all fine that she could do that.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
let's talk about your product. So why jams? I think you said a family thing. You have a family jam story.
Yeah, well, I'm originally from West Virginia, so hi
Okay.
neighbor down there in Virginia, originally. And so I just was always in a culture we grew a lot of our own food and you preserved your own foods. And specifically with my mom and my grandmother, they were known for their jams and jellies,
Hmm.
and they would make as much as possible in seasons and then give it out as an act of love. And really like that showed how much you were loved depending on if you got the last jar. So that was always the thing in the
That's
family was
funny.
like, who's going to get the last jar of apple butter from me, ma? Or who's going to get the last jar of strawberry from my mom? So that was just something that was just really special to be. And
Yeah.
then growing up and being in the kitchen with these women, practicing doing these acts. And so that's really where the inspiration came from Appalachian jam and jelly makers. And
so tell me a little bit of some of your flavors and where people can actually find these products and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we have strawberry and blackberry. So we're trying to launch and release a few more at the end of this season. We do have a Christmas jam too that comes in probably the end of October, beginning of November, and that one was a big seller.
Actually, can we just go back to the infused part? Just like it's not THC,
yeah.
this is CBD infused.
It is CBD infused.
I wasn't clear on that in the beginning.
No.
So you can actually get these if you reach out to her.
Yes, it's full spectrum CBD products, 82% of that being CBD. And we have a website, officialletsjam.com is where you can find us. We are in a few local dispensaries and places in Tennessee. We're located located in Nashville, Tennessee, and also local farmers markets. But if you are, in the space, it's interesting again talking about law, because I know again as a company trying to comply and be in compliance with law was something that really stood for in launching this business. But officialletsjam.com is where you can order to spread some love and comfort to those that you love and to yourself.
And again, Nashville, it's like one of my new, I talk about it all the time because my son's down there. So any Nashville people listening, check them out. Let's Jam. The notes in the show notes. And thank you, Cassie, for joining us. We had to reschedule a couple of times, but we finally did it.
Yeah.
And, yay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Let's get back to Victoria. Let's see. Let's talk Jews and weed. You mentioned earlier you are married to a rabbi. How does this work in your family? Does there have any religious connection to cannabis? We do talk a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. What do you want to talk about, Jews and weed?
I want to talk about Jews and weed. I'm thinking about jam and like hemp products and rescheduling. You just asked me about so many things I love. I think, I was thinking about this question before we got on because I know it's something you mentioned we might talk about. I think there are groups of people that are getting connected to like psychedelics and cannabis, getting connected to their Judaism through their use of cannabis and psychedelics. I think for me, I grew up really involved in Jewish community. That was really important to me. I've kind of had it through my divinity degree. I was at a Christian interfaith seminary, and that actually brought me, closer to my Judaism. And so, I go to synagogue regularly. I think of these things as somewhat separate realms. Like I have my professional world and I have my personal religious practice. And then sometimes I'm always looking for interesting, cool ways to like bring them together. So I'll just give one example of that, which I think has been really fun the last few years. Finally, we own a home, and so we have the right in Rhode Island law to grow our own cannabis. So I've started growing the last few years, which has been a dream of mine, and such an enjoyable, divine, transformative, really process. And I have this experience. There's a great holiday that comes in the fall after the high holidays, which Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. These are the most important holidays of the Jewish calendar. There's a holiday called Sukkot, which comes shortly after. It's a practice. It's a harvest holiday. You build a little like hut essentially, and we do it in our backyard. You bring people to your house. With little kids, maybe you camp outside. It's a reconnecting to nature and home and harvest. And if we're lucky, the last few years it has sometimes overlapped with cannabis harvest season. So I get to trim and start bringing down my cannabis plants in my sukkah, which feels like a very a meaningful experience for me. I also, in the last few years, have put cannabis on my Seder plate as sort of like a symbol for justice. A Seder plate is during Passover, which is a holiday about liberation. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of bring them together. But I also know that my own personal views and beliefs around drugs and my religious communities may not always align. So I kind of let them come to me and ask for my expertise or knowledge. We've talked about doing a Puff Passover event. It hasn't happened yet, but I think we're getting closer and closer to that.
There's a high Haggadah. The token Jew
puts
out a high Haggadah.
I got the cannabis one, and there's also a psychedelic one, which I think that for me, it's a very I see that as like a long-term life journey of bringing my like passion and knowledge around substances into my practice. But also, my religious community is not like a psychedelic church or anything. It's a pretty traditional and old religious community from like the 1800s, which is pretty cool.
Well, I would say that's so funny. So I always talk. I'm on the board at my temple, and people come up to me at services now and say, "I took a hobby." I'm like, "That's okay." But I have also been reached out by several members to take them on a tour of a dispensary because, again, this industry is very confusing to people. They don't really understand what all these products are. There are a lot of things in these dispensaries that, first of all, using your ID to get in, and you can't use credit cards, and like, what are all these products? So having a guide, someone who helps them go through. So I take people on like these little tours, and I bring them in, I help them, and that's been a nice, a little religious activity. The rabbi said it would be really fun having me on the board this year.
Well, I think about it, like there's my shul once a month, they have like a service where they have like appetizers and socialization, and they have sangria or wine. And we're just not quite ready for like the edibles, but I think in my lifetime, some jam that people can put on the little crackers with the cheese, like, we're getting there. But I think, I don't want to be imposing. I let people come to me and answer questions, and I've certainly done the same. I think people still do feel that stigma, even though it's legal to go to a dispensary. They're like, oh, like I can't go there. And I'm like, I'll go there for you, and I'll get you some products and we can talk about it. And like,
I used to have to buy my brother gummies at a legal dispensary near his house and leave them at my mother's at a secret place so he could pick them up when he went there. And after a couple of times, I'm like, you can do this yourself. You're a grown man.
Yeah.
So funny.
It's hard.
I just had one more question. So there's it's a restaurant space in Somerville just called Lair House. It's a Jewish center, and I was there last night, and we did there was a discussion with a cantor about Jews and the afterlife, which honestly I always thought was not a thing. That's how I grew up. But it was an interesting discussion and just kind of pulling things from the different texts. But I kept thinking about psychedelics. And the whole time she was talking about this is, what does happen after our bodies are gone? Like, where is this? And those are the kind of discussions I always think of psychedelics. And I talk to more death doulas now. And I think the end of our bodily life, whatever it is, I don't want to be medicated to death. I don't want to be like go under. I just think that's a terrible idea. So someday the psychedelics just seem like a thing that would open you up to whatever the universe wants you to see. That's what it feels like. And if the Torah is talking about it and all these other religions, there's got to be something to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Psychedelics. All right. We have a couple more minutes. So, all right. So, in your own family, it's okay. Things are fine. It's like you've incorporated into it, and you're coming. You're talking about it in Rhode Island. So I know it's like in Massachusetts. What's kind of like going on in the bigger kind of Rhode Island community for cannabis and psychedelics, and yeah, it's a little state with their own ideas.
Yeah. Well, I would say, on the definitely, whether it's in Rhode Island or within my family or in general, and I hate that I feel this way because it shouldn't. I think I've really professionalized my interests. Like when you're like affiliated with a research thing at Harvard Law School, and then you're like a law professor and you have a tax degree, people are like, oh, maybe you're like, I'm able to speak about it in a way that people would hear me, which it shouldn't really be like that.
That is true.
Yeah. So Massachusetts is interesting because you guys will be able to vote for a psychedelic access model ballot proposal next fall. Rhode Island doesn't have the same ballot proposal options. So we did have a bill that I helped with that would decriminalize possession and cultivation of mushrooms. That did pass the House last year. I don't think it wasn't going to pass the Senate. I think the psychedelic legislation, this is a huge topic, but
I know.
But it's still very unclear because you don't have federal guidance. So cannabis and psychedelics are very different, but also there are some similarities. And it took us almost 30 years, right, for us from the first state in 96, California passing medical, to now, and we still don't really have good federal law. I mean, we don't on cannabis. And so I think even best case scenario, you pass like a psychedelic access model, it still maybe is not that helpful. But the silver lining, I guess, is that enforcement on psychedelics is pretty low. So I think, culturally, the cultural acceptance and use is spreading everywhere,
Absolutely. I see that
including
again.
Rhode Island.
And it's also this idea that, again, it's coming in as medical intentionally. It never came in as a business model. And I do think it has a lot to do with MAPS the work that they've been doing kind of systematically to get it at the federal level. So, the country looks the same maybe at some point, but not quite there. But it's normalizing it with veterans. Like once you get anything, I even say this about cannabis, like when football players and the veterans are talking about cannabis, and it's just like a thing. So that's American culture. Whatever it is, this culture that we can't see, it's all around us. So slowly by talking about psychedelics in a normal way, having the veterans use it, talking about it at a federal level, having real laws, having people like you who exist. And, maybe that's the Jewish way, but, if you have a degree, then it's valid. No one believed me until I brought my friend Dr. Williams to an event and she talked about cannabis and that we have an endocannabinoid system. And my family was like, oh.
Yeah. I would say, the psychedelic world, and it's a challenge because and I just will touch like some of the work MAPS has done and some of the work related to the idea that like veterans could be a really good group to ask for psychedelics, and giving people enlisting psychedelics may not be what we want. Like psychedelics are not necessarily, I think this is a big takeaway. If there's one thing you're listening to and you don't know much about psychedelics is there are people that think that if you give people psychedelics, they will become good people and make the world a better place. That's not true. People use psychedelics to harm people. There's abuse and harm that occurs in psychedelic settings. It has been used, as part of war. So I think that it's very powerful. We're playing with like something that might be like magical, divine. You touched on this. That's like earth, birth, life, death. Like it's a very intense, powerful thing. And there are people in the psychedelic world who say we shouldn't talk about any harms because we're going to slow down progress. But then you're like, well, is it progress if people are being harmed? I mean, it's just, I think that weight is also somewhat different than cannabis, where people are concerned about like, substance abuse disorder with cannabis, but I think the risk potential maybe is lower. So yeah, it's easy to just paint psychedelics with a broad brush, but there's a lot there.
But I do like that discussion. Maybe to come on again. Again, everything has benefits and drawbacks, and this idea that this psychedelic medicine, this plant medicine, could be used to really heal many people. I mean, again, not everybody, and I've heard this over and again, especially on webinars I've been on with you, because you have very sober, practical people on there talking about this at a very high level. It doesn't work for everybody. It isn't for everybody. But we also don't talk very much about the harm. So, and again, we're not going to go into this, but it could create a situation where people could really use it badly, just like anything. So whatever the, I don't know, the boundaries are, the safety rails, whatever we have to do around this to make it a medicine that helps people and reduces the harm. That's the process, right? Yeah. And we need good people like you doing this. Oh, we're done. Oh, sorry. All right. Victoria, what is your favorite way to consume?
Oh, I mean, I'm a flower person, but I also love topicals.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm like, you have an itch, put a salve on it. You got a headache, try some salve. Like you have cramps, salve is the answer. Like I love topicals.
I'm glad it's not just me. My kids make fun of me. They're like, Mom, it doesn't fix everything. I'm like, I think it does. All right. All right, Victoria, people want to like reach you, connect with you, want to take a class with you, anything, whatever. How do they connect with you and find you?
I mean, LinkedIn is a good way if you're on there, or like Twitter, which people don't really use, X, Instagram. I'm pretty online because I'm a zillennial or whatever. I guess now these days most people are online, or an email. If you look me up on my academic email, my Roger Williams email works, or don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. And it'll all be on the show notes. And that is another show. All right. So for my guests, Victoria and Cassie, thank you for joining us. And of course, my Cannabis David Yaz and our Cannabis Show team, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cannabis Show. We're on a mission to enhance the impact women have on the emerging cannabis industry by sharing and preserving their stories of love, kindness, wisdom, and hope. Thank you for joining us and sharing these inspiring stories. So together, we will crush that stigma around cannabis and caregivers. I'm your host, Joyce Gerber. This is the Cannabis Show, and we are a production of Pod 617, the Boston Podcast Network. So funny.